Go back to one of the core problems that we've been trying to address, which is the apparent failure, perhaps, of the rationalist atheist types to develop an active ethos that has sufficient beauty and motivational power to serve as a credible replacement for the religious rituals. So there must be a reason why that failure has occurred, right? So, do you have any sense of what the reason might be?
I can give you a short list of reasons. One is that traditionally the impulse to do that in a religious context has been fatal, right? So to declare your apostasy has been the almost as reliable a way of committing suicide as jumping off a building in most cultures and most societies for the longest time, and still is in many places, as you know, in the Muslim world. So there's been a barrier to entry to thinking creatively about alternatives to religion. And so much of atheism and secularism is just a pitched battle against the eroding power of religion. I mean, when religion really has its power, right? We know what it's like. I mean, again, I think we spoke about this at one point. The moment that it makes this most salient is, Galileo being shown the instruments of torture by men who wouldn't look through his telescope. Right? I mean, that was the point of contact between untrammeled human rationality and the womb that bore it. Right? The religious awe at the beauty of the heavens. Right? So the moment a person like Galileo stepped a little too far, and to connect this to astrology again, Galileo was a court astrologer, right? I mean, so there was a point of contact between astronomy and astrology at that point. So we're still under the shadow of that kind of dogmatism and oppression in much of the world. I mean, for the longest time, it's still in the United States, you cannot run for the presidency without pretending to believe in God. It's amazing. It's an amazing fact, right? When will that change? Someday it will, but we have just had almost no time to experiment in this space and innovate in this space.
Well, there's been some time. There've been some decades. And I suppose the thing that unites Jordan and me on this is if we face some of the problems, some of the enemies, you might even say, that you identify as well, and the question is whether you should face them in the midst of an experiment that may or may not work, i.e. a leap into pure rationality, or whether you might decide it's worth, among other things, taking some of the versions of things that you've had that have been of worth in your past and using them where they're useful.
But what are you picturing there? Because there really is no leap. There's no global leap to pure rationality. There's this incremental erosion of religious answers to terrestrial questions. So there's again, the moment you have a science of neurology, you begin to look at epilepsy not as demonic possession, but as a neurological problem. Before there's a science of neurology, you don't know what the hell's happening, right? So into that space,
something obviously drove Douglas, I would say, in some sense, surprisingly, to make the assumption that one of the things that we need to do to defend whatever it is that we have of value in the West, assuming that we have anything of value, was something like the reincorporation of this religious substructure. So it's not something that I would have expected you to conclude.
Yeah, but what are you
why
picturing?
did you conclude it?
Well, partly for the reason I just suggested, that the leap into pure rationality, there's no evidence yet that it's going to work, or it's going to be enough, or enough people are going to be able to
of this religious substructure. So it's not something that I would have expected you to conclude.
Yeah, but what are you
why
picturing?
did you conclude it?
Well, partly for the reason I just suggested, that the leap into pure rationality, there's no evidence yet that it's going to work, or it's going to be enough, or enough people are going to be able to partake in it.
But give me the precise place where you're worried that it's going to fail, and what are you imagining
Well, you
doing?
think it's failing now.
Yeah, let me give you one example.
Yeah.
And we may be in the midst of the discovery that the only thing worse than religion is its absence.
And where are we discovering that?
Look at the religions that people are making up as we speak. I mean, every day there's a new dogma, and you and I and Jordan have repeatedly tripped over those dogmas. Some usually survived, it has to be said, but they're stampeding to create new religion all the time at the moment. Every new heresy that's invented. And they're not as well thought through as past heresies. They don't always have the bloody repercussions yet, but you can easily foresee a situation in which they do.
Right,
I mean, a new religion is being created as we speak by a new generation of people who think they are non-ideological, who think they're very rational, who think they're past myth, who think they're past story, who think they're better than any of their ancestors and have never bothered to even study their ancestors.
Right. So, but can't you say that dogmatism is the problem? The generic problem here is dogmatism, a firm belief in the absence of good argument and good evidence.
And absolutely, we can agree that dogmatism of any kind has that danger, or will always have that danger. But the void also has a danger. The void that you can create if you throw out all the stories that helped get you to where you are also has this danger, because people come up with these new stories. And every day's news now is about this. Our politics is now basically about this. I mean, well, actually...
Yeah, and what's flown in to fill the gap seems to be something like a new tribalism.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what you'd expect in some sense, right? If you demolish the superordinate system, you know, religion divides people, no doubt, but it also unites people.
Yes.
And so one of the things that arguably unites people above their mere tribalism is their union in an abstract religious superstructure. Yeah. And then if you demolish that, well then one of the things that does seem to happen is the emergence of a reflexive tribalism, because people need a group identity of sorts. And the easiest thing to do seems to be to revert to ethnicity and race and gender and sex, etc., etc. And then we do end up, and have ended up, in this situation that Douglas outlines. And you know, one of the things I think that distinguishes us temperamentally, possibly, maybe because you're a little more on the liberal side and I'm a little more on the conservative side, even temperamentally speaking, is that your fundamental terror is that of fundamentalism, although you also state in the moral landscape that you understand the perils of nihilism. And I would say my fundamental terror is that of nihilism, even though I'm sensitive to the catastrophes of fundamentalism. But I don't think you do address the problem of the void sufficiently, because I don't think that you have anything to offer except, and I'm not trying to minimize your offering. You make a case that people should work to alleviate suffering and that we should live in truth, but Jesus, Sam, you can summarize that in 2 sentences. It doesn't have the potency of the fictional, literary, artistic substructure that seems necessary to make that into something that's a compelling story.
Well, so this is where we might disagree. This could be a fundamental disagreement, because I don't see the problem of nihilism the way you do, or the way it's advertised. Like once you rip out the false certainties and the bad evidence and the bad arguments and the mere dogmas imposed on us by prior generations, that hole never closes safely with anything else. You have to put something in its place that's shaped just like that, some other false certainty or some other story. And I simply don't think that's the case. I think there's so many things we outgrow, both individually, you know, in our own childhoods, and culturally, that where there is no void left. There's no Santa Claus-shaped void that we have to fill with the exact same thing.
But people certainly experience that.
Some people,
void.
yeah, people. I'm not discounting the fact that it is hard to be happy in this world. I mean, we are living in a world that seems perfectly designed to frustrate our efforts to find permanent happiness.
So you asked me, you put me on the spot a while back.
But let me just add my answer to this. I just think that there's the recipe for a good life, or at least a minimal recipe for a good life. It's not that this is all that's entailed, but this is certainly necessary, if not sufficient, is to live a life that is increasingly motivated by love and guided by reason. Right? You can't go very far wrong if you are motivated by love and guided by reason, right? And the problem is that.
Well, okay. Well, the first thing I would say about that is, to me, that's a recapitulation of the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is that you should be guided by love and use logos to serve that.
Except
and
you got to read the fine print on reason.
No, well, I didn't say reason. I said logos, because that's that's something that's deeper than reason.
There's the Jesus smuggling.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes, definitely.
I said it would happen.
Okay, so, but so look, I've been trying to. Part of the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is to try to address the void, let's say, and I suspect that many of you are actually here because you would like to have the void addressed. And so the way it looks to me is something like this, and this is what I've derived in part from my studies of religious tradition. So I could say that at the beginning of Genesis, for example, there's a proposition that it's truthful speech that generates habitable order from chaotic potential. That seems to me to be the fundamental narrative, and I do believe there's something dead accurate and real about that, because we do generate the world as a consequence of our communicative effort. And then there's a second proposition, which is that the world that we generate from the chaos of potential is habitable to the degree that the communication that we engage in is truthful. And that's why God, who uses the logos at the beginning of time to generate the world, is able to say that his creation is good. The proposition is the world you bring into being through truthful speech is good. And that's the image of God that's implanted in man and woman. And there's a grandeur about that idea. And you think, well, you don't need the grandeur because it's just a fiction. It's like, just wait a second here. It's not just a fiction. Unless you don't believe that in some manner you partake in the creation of the world and that you have an ultimate responsibility that might well be described as divine to participate in that process properly, truthfully, and with love. And there's every reason to think that that's an elevated ideal so high that it's worthy of conceptualizing as divine, and also to presume that it represents some fundamental metaphysical reality. And that's a lot more powerful than you need to be good.
Yes, but the problem here, Jordan, is that I could do exactly what you just did with Buddhism or Hinduism. And it is just as grand and just as deep and just as anchored to the first-person experience of contemplatives who've taken that as far as they could take it. You know, people,
well, then
monastics.
I would say, Sam, you should do that and see how people respond to it.
Well, no, because I.
Yes,
because, no,
seriously.
No, because I see the end of the game. It doesn't arrive where I want to get to, where we need to get to, because it would be to different effect. There are different claims ultimately about the status of truth and good and evil, and about the beginning of the world and the fate of a human consciousness after death. They're completely irreconcilable worldviews.
I also don't think that...
You cannot square... If there are Hindus in the audience, they believe something that is totally irreconcilable to what Christians believe.
I don't think that you can offer, pardon me, a watered-down version of Buddhism as a consequence of psychedelic experience as a acceptable and credible alternative to the power of the fundamental founding myths of the Western culture.
Yeah,
and if you think you can, then you should try.
I'm trying. Well, I'm not trying that, but that's not what I. Well, first of all, just to get my biography straight, it's not just the psychedelic experience.
I know.
Yes.
And I'm also not making light of the psychedelic experience.
Listen, to take this. We're having most of this conversation on the side of wherein it seems reasonable to worry about the fate of civilization, right? We could have started at a very different point with just the nature of consciousness, right? Our first-person encounter with being itself, right? All of us wake up each morning. We are thrust from a condition of deep sleep, which we seem to know nothing about, and we're just through a veil of dreams into this apparently solid reality that we call the world, and we're engaging one another in this space of just consciousness and its contents, and we're trying to make sense of it. And science is the best language game we play, I would argue, in trying to make truly rigorous sense of it. But it's not, it doesn't exhaust all the language games we play. We play others that are also fact-based. We talk about what happened historically before we arrived here. We talk about facts as we can understand them that we just didn't witness, but others did, and we call that journalism, right? So we're trying to have a fact-based discussion.
We used to call that journalism.
Yes, it's getting harder and harder to discern what's actually going on now. But we are thrust into this condition of being our apparent selves moment by moment, and we notice the difference between happiness and suffering, right? And this is not merely sensory. It's not merely that, you know, I don't like the feeling of a hot stove, and I do like a warm bath. It's ideas, the ways of thinking about ourselves and the world can open the door or close the door to various states of happiness and suffering. And religion leverages that. People, the difference between believing that your dead child is in heaven with Jesus and not being able to believe that is enormous, right?
Wow, wow, wow. Just so much great stuff back and forth between those three individuals. Amazing stuff, amazing. And I'd like to try to summarize a little bit, but that last statement that Sam Harris made, it is so profound, because what he's talking about is that belief that an individual or a mother and father or whoever that family structure is, that belief that they have that their baby is now in heaven with Jesus, and that's from the Christian viewpoint, that is absolutely huge. And Sam is making that point that whether or not he doesn't believe in that, but because there is something that's there, that's where he says religion comes in to capture that void of that ethos. Now, Jordan Peterson could counter, or I would counter and say, Sam, is what do you have from an atheist standpoint to replace that place of peaceful tranquility that at least somebody can have in the face of a loss, a human loss, their baby's death? What do you as an atheist have as a place where this family, this husband, this wife, this mother, this father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandmother, grandfather can go to have solace and peace and say that that baby or that loved one who has passed away, where? Religion has a place for that. And in Catholicism, isn't like purgatory, like for a young child or baby that has been born, it really hasn't gone to heaven. It's just waiting there in line, so to speak, to go to heaven. Other religions are the same. When you have with Hinduism, well, what is it? Reincarnation. There are other places in terms of realms where you can, depending upon, you know, what caste you're in and what you can be reincarnated into. And those are other places of like nirvana. With Buddhism, what is it? It's the fact that you transcend your body and you go into this complete area of just where it's just pure nothingness, but it's pure thought. It's a realm where you've escaped the humanly body, the humanly experience, and you're just there with the realm of creation. Judaism and Islam, it's to get to heaven. And then whatever the rewards are there in heaven that are described or prescribed by, you know, the various texts, the various, books. So up until somebody can replace something with that, the atheists need to have some place that you replace that with. And it's not good enough that you just have to try to overcome it. You just have to pull yourself out of it. No, there has to be something tangible that somebody can, say, okay, we've experienced this loss, but maybe there's something that is going to come of this, or that the place that the person has gone to is better than this. They're in a better place. Atheists, they don't have an answer for that. And in many cases, they don't want to go in that direction because they know they don't have an answer to that, but they can keep attacking the religious side to say, well, how do you know? How do you know? And we can basically say, well, how do you know that we don't? That there isn't? Someone's going to be right in this matter. I'd rather err on the side that there is somebody out there, because if there isn't, then it doesn't really matter anyways. But if there is, well, then someone's going to have a lot of splaining to do, Sam. You got some splaining to do. So again, it's just this battle between Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, who I think are sort of, I think, Douglas and I believe, I'm sorry, Jordan, I believe, has come to a newfound realization of Christianity. Douglas is sort of there, I think, but not quite. But he's more on the Jordan Peterson side of the religious question. And obviously Sam Harris is completely, off on the, he's on the beach by himself, all right? And that's what makes for such an absolutely fascinating discussion between these two. Anyways, we hope you appreciated that. We've been bringing you content like this, and if you do so, we'd love for you to go ahead and subscribe, because you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, and if you haven't done so already and you love our content, we'd love for you to go ahead and smash that subscription bell, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do when you do that. Take a look at our other video links here and below. My final thought: when you're right, you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.